Well, hey there and welcome to Conversations in Color. My name is Ed Hudgins. I'm so glad that you are tuning in here. We just finished having an incredible conversation. We had Dr. Selika Ducksworth-Lawton from the University of Wisconsin at Eau Claire and Adam Accola from CoLab, both of them involved in multiple other projects as well. And we had a great conversation about conversation, really, talking about things that are not always comfortable or easy to talk about and how to do that, and recognizing how nuanced conversation is, how nuanced most issues that we talk about really are. It was really encouraging and a rich conversation for me, and I'm really excited to have you listen in and be a part of the conversation. Before we do that, one of the things I want to say is, we have these three pillars that we talk about on Conversations in Color: honesty, humility, and humanity. And I feel like this conversation, like all of them, but this conversation really did typify those three pillars, and I'm excited about that. We always want to demonstrate those three pillars in all of our conversations. And before we get into the actual conversation, I want to mention our incredible partners that without them, Conversations in Color can't happen. First of all, Shift Cyclery and Coffee Bar, which they provide this beautiful venue for us to have these conversations in. Pablo Center at the Confluence, Converge Radio 101.9 FM, and the University of Wisconsin at Eau Claire. Thank you to those incredible sponsors and partners. Again, this wouldn't happen without their assistance, without their help and support. Without any further ado, I invite you into the conversation. Well, it is really good to be sitting with you two. It's been a bit since I've had a chance to hang out with you two.
Yeah,
definitely.
I'm excited about that, and we've had in the last few minutes before we started rolling here, we've been talking about a lot of stuff. I'm like, wait, let's talk about that. Let's talk about that on the show. So, before we do, let's just check in real quick. Adam, I haven't talked to you in forever.
Yeah.
And just saying that brought out my southern accent for some reason. I don't know what that was about, but you got a lot going on these days, CoLab, theater, all kinds of stuff. What's happening with you? What do you have your hands in right now?
Yeah, a couple things that I got my hands in at work at CoLab right now. We're planning a big move in June, so we're moving down to Barstow Commons right next to Lismore. And so I've been busy at work with that. But also through 1 Million Cups, I've been involved in a collaborative learning circle, it's called. And so we're a group of people from across the United States that are all 1 Million Cups organizers. And 1 Million Cups, if I haven't talked about it on this show, is a weekly meetup at CVTC for entrepreneurs. And so people come in, they tell their story, get some Q&A and feedback from our audience, which is entrepreneurs and startup owners and service providers and students and faculty. So it's a really cool base, and there's some really good conversations that roll out of it. But a big question, I think throughout the history of the Kauffman Foundation, which is what it's based out of, has been diversity in entrepreneurship. And they offer a lot of grant programs and things for underrepresented entrepreneurs. But one thing that they've made a concerted effort into is EDI, and they've actually included racial equity, diversity, and inclusivity, so it's ready. So I'm doing this collaborative learning circle. We're meeting once a month for 9 months, and then we also have a different partner each month that we're paired up with. So I've met up with someone from Pennsylvania, someone from Georgia, and someone from California, and we have conversations about what we talked about in the big group, and then also have assignments and things that we work on. And the plan is to come together over the next, now it's going to be 6 months, and develop a plan for increased equity, diversity, and inclusivity in the 1 Million Cups national organization.
Awesome.
So that's been really exciting. I've also been working with Mai Zhang and Billy Lohr with Halid on the HERE conference, the Hmong Economic Development Conference that they're hosting in September here in Eau Claire.
Okay.
And it'll be the first one ever. So I'm really excited about that, and hopefully I've been talking with Mai. Hopefully we can get her on in the next month or so to chat a little bit more about that. We were hoping to have her on tonight,
but it just didn't work out, which was a real bummer because I love talking to Mai.
Yeah.
Yes.
There's a lot of fire in that small little package.
Yes.
She's gonna change the world and move it at the same time.
Yep.
One of the things I just wanted to say, Adam, I appreciate about you is just the.
Oops, sorry. Wow, sorry.
Justin won't cut that out. So.
No, that's totally that's candid. We're keeping that right there. But one of the things I really appreciate, I've always appreciated this about you, is just the continuity between the way I hear you talk about things and then the activities you're involved in, and just like there's just this continuity all the time. It's you live and breathe the things that you talk about, which I really appreciate that.
Thank you.
And speaking of such, yes, that truth. The same could be said about you, Selika. What's new and exciting in your world?
Well, we just wrapped up Martin Luther King.
Yeah,
the link
that's right.
The link for the program is on the Pablo's website, so people can go out and see it. And again, of course, turning around to start planning Juneteenth.
Yes.
Working on a couple of things for Black History Month for the city.
Oh, cool.
Especially a panel on crucial conversations, which we think is going to be the base for getting people to do some shared values work, but also some public de-escalation trainings. So I have my hands in that, and writing, and troublemaking,
Awesome.
as usual. Trying to figure out how to get some conservatives and liberals into a space and get them to start thinking about shared values. So that's been on my mind and working with some people, and we'll see what comes out of that.
If only we could get a couple of those folks on the opposite side of the aisle to maybe sit at a table at a coffee shop and have a conversation.
Well, I have a couple who, they're not politicians, but you know what? I mean, it's probably less important to get the politicians to do it than get some ordinary people to do it.
Yeah.
So we can stomp some politicians and make them do it.
And I think this actually would kind of be an interesting little rabbit hole to go down a little bit, because ever since we've kind of talked about this as a concept, I've always been a little bit apprehensive about bringing a conservative talker on the show, simply for the fact that we don't have a live fact checker. We don't have someone that can say yes, no, debunk the claims, and we don't want to put misinformation out there. At the same time, I think it's important to kind of hear that it exists, but sometimes that misinformation has such a strong hold on people that they don't even want to believe the truth.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's important to get responsible people. And there are responsible conservatives who are not going to engage in the bear baiting that we see on TV. Just like it's important to always have responsible liberals. So
certainly there's misinformation gets pumped out by liberals as well.
So I think that I have a few people in mind who are experts in their field or have expertise, and I think to have them talking about their expertise will keep it from becoming a slugfest.
Well, and expertise and experiences,
Yeah.
rather than generalizations about.
The more experience people have, the more they see shades of gray. I mean, you can see that, especially with former President Bush, and I'm not picking on him, but he was far more nuanced and saw shades of gray in business, which is where he had a lot of experience. When you took him out of business, he was sort of black and white thinker, because the less experience you have, the easier it is to say, oh, it's A or it's B.
Because it's just simpler. You don't have to put as much work into it.
And you don't recognize how many ways people can go haywire.
Yeah.
So that's, the more, if you get people who are experienced to sit down, you're just going to have a better conversation. The biggest problem in this world is a bunch of people who don't know what they're talking about, and they put them
in the Senate.
Yeah, well, I didn't say that, but I mean, I was thinking they put them on TV, they do that kind of stuff. You know, they put them there, and their main purpose is to scream at people, and it's not to have an intelligent conversation.
No.
Yeah.
You know, it's kind of like, I remember Jackie Robinson, and it wasn't George Will, it was the other one. His son runs the New Republic. And they were discussing civil rights, and because Jackie Robinson had integrated baseball, he understood what he was talking about. You know, and to have Branch Rickey there, he understood what he was talking about. And that was a respectful conversation that was on Meet the Press. You know, now today we have people who just seem to specialize in screaming insults.
Yeah.
And that has never been a good way. You know, to have people get together who know how to keep Uncle Jojo from throwing the mashed potatoes at Thanksgiving, I think that's where we need to go.
Yeah.
Because there's too many Uncle Jojos right now. And there's too many of us trying not to throw mashed potatoes at them because they're pushing our buttons.
Oh yeah.
I watched, I can't remember, the Face the Nation this last Sunday morning. And there was a Republican congressperson and a Democrat as well, not on at the same time. They were interviewing about different things. And I was actually, what's the word? It was refreshing in that both of them, you know, they had their opinions about things, of course. But there were opportunities in both of the interviews for the person to really just kind of pile on the people on the other side, and they didn't, like, because they didn't. You could tell, like, they didn't feel like if I, you know, like, that wouldn't be the truth, which was refreshing.
Yeah.
You know, because you don't always get that, especially when you're watching the 24-hour news channels. You know, but there was the gentleman, and I can't remember his name. He's chairing the committee that's doing the January 6th investigation, and then the Republican gentleman, I can't remember the project he was working on, but in both cases, there was restraint, which was refreshing.
Well, there was a conversation I had with a Republican friend of mine who's white, and it was about entrepreneurship in the Black community. And he wanted a program that was about teaching Black people to be entrepreneurs. And I looked at him and said, we know how to be entrepreneurs. What we need is a program that will remove some of the hyper-regulation and nitpicking around small business loans.
Yep.
And some of the redlining of areas so that we can reinvest. And he came back with, well, what about enterprise zones? And I said, enterprise zones don't work. What we need are the loans, because we have this long history with enterprise zones.
And there's plenty of access to education and resources. It's simply the access to capital that's a big gap right now.
But what I was suggesting was not the liberal response, which would have been a program. And what he was suggesting is the conservative response, which is we make an enterprise zone. I was suggesting microloans, which is a whole different animal.
Yep.
And there was a recent article in The Atlantic that talked about how we need more conversations like that, where we're not looking for the conservative knee-jerk or the liberal knee-jerk. We need to look at what the people in there are dealing with and ask them what they need. I mean, almost like here in Eau Claire, we have a landlord problem. We need more rental property that's reasonably priced.
Yeah.
On one hand, we have renters who can't afford it. On the other hand, we have landlords who are rightfully afraid of having their properties torn up or not getting paid rent on time. But we also have people who have lost jobs because of COVID, who are going to need some support. Well, the liberal prescription would be, you know, Section 8, that we pay the landlords, or we create Section 8 housing. The conservative prescription would be to give landlords more power to screen and do things like that. What if we came in the middle and did something that involved Habitat for Humanity and the banks, so that some of these people who have just been able to get jobs and get on their feet could buy houses with their jobs as the collateral. Right. Something that looked like the 1946 GI Bill. You know, those kind of things are where we need to be going, but it's hard to get them out there because just as I put it out, there's probably someone on each side who has just decided to try to, well, that must be liberal or that must be conservative. Not everything has to be liberal or conservative. No. You know, so I think that that's a part of the hard part of what we're dealing with here.
Yeah. I think an interesting thing that's going through the Senate right now is the barring of congressional members from trading stocks.
Yep.
And how there's bipartisan support from senators like Ossoff, the Democratic senator from Georgia, and Josh Hawley. Like, where would you see them working together on something or finding a point of compromise, and they're co-sponsoring this bill together? Just because it makes sense.
Right. It's the right idea.
And you got politicians too from both sides that are adamantly against it. Pelosi's against it. And yeah, it's just out of touch. They're out of touch, and it shows that kind of elitism of a lot of our elected representatives and why people don't think that they work for us.
But this is a problem that we're dealing with right now. Let me just go and get myself in trouble. I mean, we're looking at a situation here where the UW system presidency was handed to someone who has no higher ed experience, but who evidently has given donations to the governor and people on the governor's slate over someone who has 30 years of higher ed experience, and who, when higher ed budgets went to hell from 2014 to 2016, actually kept this university in the black, despite the second largest cut in UW system. This university is actually still in the best financial position outside of Madison and Milwaukee. What was going on there? A lot of people who I know and I work with are looking at this and going, that looks like corruption. And that's a bipartisan art. You've got Republicans and you've got Democrats both looking at that and going, what just happened here?
Right. Yeah.
But the question becomes for us, then what can we do about it? It's really hard for us at this level to handle that kind of misbehavior. There's things, though, individually that we can start doing. I mean, especially to start thinking about how do we have these crucial conversations across the aisle? How do we de-escalate when people start getting into that, I'm gonna just keep repeating this talking point because what you're saying is scaring me? How do we get people to be comfortable with discomfort? I don't know how to do that.
Yeah.
I just told people, well, maybe y'all need to learn to tap and, for discomfort, and when you feel your throat tightening up, to do the 4-7-8 breath so you can sit with that discomfort and not be afraid, but everybody's afraid of the dark. There's
no growth outside of discomfort, though. Growth is by necessity uncomfortable. You're moving outside of what you know, what's comfortable. I think that's the real issue is, does somebody have a growth mindset or are they stuck? Do they want to grow or do they not want to grow? And I have, I just like anybody else, I have times where I don't really want to discuss this particular thing because I'm pretty good with where I am on it, and other times where I just want to develop and I want to continue growing, and most of the time that's where I want to be. But I know that there are times where I get into that stuck mode. And then you have some people who just, they got it figured out, at least as much as they want to have things figured out, and so I'm not really interested in rocking that boat too much. That's the hard part.
Part of the problem, though, is that it's not just technology that's changing our world right now. It's It's demographics are changing our world. It's birth rate that's changing our world. And we can, if what's happening right now is good for you and you want to stay on that, that's all well and good until you can't do it anymore. Mm-hmm. So we can either get ahead of the change and push it into ways that work for everybody, or we can sit back here crying and screaming, I don't want to change. And in history, you always have this set of people who scream against new technologies and new demographics.
Right. Mm-hmm.
I mean, in the 1840s, it was Irish immigrants. They hated Irish immigrants, and they were mad at the telegraph. And they thought that books, reading, widespread literacy was going to corrupt the young. It was going to destroy them.
I mean, I think some would still make that argument.
That's right. That's true.
By the time you get to the 1920s, it's radio. You know, they banned the song Tiny Bubbles, the Lawrence Welk song, from the radio in the 40s and 50s because they thought it might turn children to drugs, and then they go into marijuana, and then they go into heroin, and the next thing you know, they're flying off buildings. You know? By the time you get to the 1970s, I'm an 8-year-old kid in front of a TV watching Lawrence Welk and his radical accordion playing Tiny Bubbles,
right?
You know, right before the NBC movie came on, mm-hmm. You know, or you know, Wild Kingdom. I can't remember which one was first. I just remember Jim always being down in a hole, being eaten by snakes or something like that. Can you tell I'm a child of the 70s? But whether or not they want it, the technology's going to stay. The changes are going to stay. You can get ahead of the changes. Or you can be somebody screaming in the 1970s about Lawrence Welk's accordion being a dangerous weapon.
Yeah, this is where I get a little Ecclesiastes, though. A little bit of thinking about this, of chasing after the wind, everything is meaningless, you know. Because part of that is just, it's like, it's, I think, just the human condition that's always been there. That people that, especially if you have received some kind of benefit from the current status, the way things are, then you're going to resist whatever changes may come that may rock that and maybe impinge on your privilege or your benefit that you're getting from it. And I mean, I see it in the church world. I see it in cultural movements. Virtually every community every time people are together, there's this dynamic where, you know, to give an example, like, I grew up in a charismatic church in southeastern Virginia where we sang songs a certain way, the services were a certain way, and it was predictable. It was going to be like this every Sunday, you know. We were going to have an altar call and people weren't going to be falling out and there was going to be all kinds of stuff happening. Okay, that was every Sunday. That is how, for example, my parents think church should work, how it should be every Sunday. Even now, 40 years later, that's the way church, that's like how it's supposed to be. And they're not unique. That's pretty typical. And it's not just in church or you know, religious communities. I think it's everywhere. And the less you are exposed to people who are different and experience things differently than you, the more apt you are, I think, to want to stay stuck in that spot because you're not being challenged with different perspectives, even if things could potentially be better.
But we have
that's why it feels a little bit like Ecclesiastes to me.
I mean, one of the things I've learned is that you have to make change easy for them. And you have to show people how change benefits them. I've been accused by some multicultural people of coddling white people because I always point out that the things that help bring diversity in community, help support diversity, the things that help people who are differently abled, the things that help us bridge race, help everyone. You know, if I'm doing an inclusive pedagogy, it's not just helping my multicultural students. It's helping my white students as well. It's leveling a playing field. But
Well, you got to
that's-
create that inclusive sense of belonging, and there's got to be buy-in from the majority in that situation, and you got to make that buy-in accessible, not like water it down to the point where it's just equality rather than equity. But I think you need that buy-in from that majority for it to be effective.
I also think we have to make it easy, and too much in the workforce and too much in the church, diversity becomes this add-on. It becomes
Right.
this
Yep.
additional thing to do. And instead of putting it in and saying, I'm going to take this off your plate, it becomes the next two things that go on your plate. And working in a university environment, I can tell you as a faculty member, there are many people on, I'm not going to beat up on all my staff colleagues, but there are many people on the staff side who go, well, we're just going to have you do this one more thing. And when 10 divisions have you do this one more thing, you wind up on the floor with a wine bottle. I mean, because you're exhausted. But that's
Well,
not.
you've already got enough going on anyway as a professor teaching classes. Like, you're teaching college courses, you've already got enough going on, and then to pile on.
To your point, though, like the idea is you want that thought and the philosophy of it and whatever processes that need to come along with that to be just integrated into normal workflow.
Yes.
Not something that's added in.
Well, it should be a
But it's-
lens or a blanket
Yes.
rather than like a wedge and something that you add on.
Right.
Or a form you have to fill
Yep.
out, or a checkbox that you have to check.
Right.
And I think the start of that is we really have to teach people how to be comfortable with a difficult conversation, how to be comfortable with change, because we don't teach that. We don't teach that at all, and we don't teach people how to disagree without insulting or demonizing each other.
Right.
I mean, we used to, now we've compartmentalized.
Are you going
it.
to talk about the need for civics classes again?
No, because it's not in civics class where you do this.
All right.
I mean, it's where it used to be in history where we had the competing arguments. There's actually a book that I used to use called Conflicts and Consensus, that you use conflict to get to consensus. But, the biggest thing I think about is taking the Gottman method and taking it out into the real world and out of the marriage world. Because if you think about it, the biggest change that many of us have had since the early 1970s has been with marriage. It's been women going into the workforce, it's been women's equality, it's been interracial marriage, it's been gay marriage, and we're pioneering new structures. But no one's taught us or teaches us how to be marriages of equals. Just like no one teaches us how to talk across culture. No one teaches us how to question our assumptions and our perceptions. So.
Well, in blanket statements like, well, just treat everyone the same or treat everyone like you want to be treated. Sometimes that other person on the receiving end of that treatment doesn't want to be treated like you want to be treated. They want to be treated
differently.
like themselves.
Yeah, if you are, and I've had some guys do this to me. I work with the military. I can sound like them. Sometimes they forget I'm female. And if they all of a sudden want to play skins on shirts for basketball, it's like, whoa, bud. Lady, excuse me, no, will not be taking off the shirt.
Yeah.
So we have to get people comfortable with this idea of individualization. And this comment that people like to make that I treat everybody the way I want to be treated. Well, what if you're tolerant of something I can't tolerate?
Yep.
Right.
But to get people, Gottman argues that for people to argue effectively in a marriage, you have to start with a soft send-up. That when you attack people right off the bat, very few people can sit back and tolerate that. And I think that's the same with race. When you just jump out there and start screaming, you're a racist, you're a sexist, you're a homophobe, you're a transphobe, you're a TERF or whatever. People tend to have, according to the Gottman research, 2 responses. They turtle up, go silent, withdraw, or run screaming from the room, or they attack.
Right.
And they attack back. So he talks about this soft send up where you start with, I'm respectful for you, I want the best for us, I don't understand why. And just, starting people with a simple, I don't understand why you're doing this, could you help me? I mean, that would help everything from university professors with students who don't know why they're coming to class, to married people, doesn't matter whether they're gay, straight, whatever, fighting over the dishwasher. Because let's be honest, people fight over the dishwasher.
Or just the dishes.
Or the dishes. I mean, in my world, there is a right way to stack the dishwasher. In some
This
other
feels like
people's
another whole
world, there's not.
conversation we could dive into right now.
But see, for me to go attacking and say, because I think there's a right way to stack the dishwasher, everyone should do it my way.
Right.
I think with this though, it's interesting because sometimes even when a conversation isn't approached aggressively or in an attacking way, the person on the other end, because these types of conversations have been so polarized and so like I'm on this side or I'm on that side, it's a very binary thing, people feel like they're being attacked. I was having a conversation with someone last week about the show Come From Away, which was just playing in the Twin Cities. It's about the town of Gander that took in 38 planes on 9/11 and housed 7,000 people, like twice the size of their town, across several communities in Newfoundland. And there's a character that plays a gay man and a Muslim man from Egypt. Throughout the course of the show, you find out that the Muslim man is a chef at a 5-star restaurant and is super accomplished. But there's a lot of that xenophobia against him because of what just happened with 9/11, and they're all kind of stranded in hyper-white Newfoundland where they don't have a lot of Muslim diversity.
Right.
Someone suggested that if we were ever to do this in Eau Claire, I could play that character, and I didn't have the conversation there about, I don't think that's quite what you mean to say with that, because Muslim is not a race, it's a religion.
Right.
And so you don't need to look a certain way to play a Muslim character, but that's definitely kind of the association that was being made. But for me to even start that conversation would have a lot of background knowledge to bring into it. And then also the person saying it definitely wasn't intending for it to come off as insensitive to Muslim people or anything like that. But for me to say, hey, just so you know, that could definitely be conceived as xenophobic or racist if you're equating Muslims with a certain look or a certain nationality.
Right.
But then that person would not have necessarily been listening if that's what I led the conversation off with.
Right.
Because they're wait, what did I do wrong? And he's mad at me now. He's offended. No, I'm not offended by it. You just need to understand. And that's I think where we're missing a lot of these conversations is people feel like they're being attacked right off the bat, even if you just say, hey, what you said there, that was racist, and here's why. And approach it even with love. But
well, if we start with a script with, and I'll admit I avoid the word racist because I know it triggers a lot of people.
Right.
But if we start with a script that says, I know you didn't intend it to come across this way, but that came across weirdly to me or strangely to me. Could you restate it? Could you think about stating it in a way that I might understand it a little better? Or the way you stated it felt like it implied this, and I don't think you meant that. I think what people want is when they make the mistake to know that they've gotten the benefit of the doubt. And you know, for us to get that benefit of the doubt in there first. I mean, there's a couple of people I've had to go to and say, I know you're not racist, but when you do this,
Sure makes
you
it seem like
create
it.
irritation and you need to stop. You know? Or I know you don't mean to make me crazy, but when you do this, it's not a good thing.
Well, and again, it's never the intention of the person delivering the remark or saying the thing. It's the effect that it has on the recipient of that.
Yep.
And that's what matters, and that's what I feel like a lot of people don't understand or really even care about at this point.
No, that's right. That's right.
We're at this point where, oh, you're just canceling me. It's like, no, I was trying to have a conversation, but now you've really polarized it by bringing cancel culture into it.
I think you have to be careful, though, too, with who you can have a conversation with.
I was just thinking about that.
There are some people who are going to immediately pull out, oh, you're canceling me, oh, you're doing this, or you're doing that, which I think is manipulative. And that's people who don't want to have a conversation. I don't think you can have a crucial conversation at all with someone who's abusive, with someone who's manipulative, because they're always going to turn it around. And that's when you step back and walk away. You have to have judgment about who you could. And the hardest part about this is having that judgment about who you can have a conversation with. And it's partially taking a chance. And being willing to be vulnerable, and partially it's knowing who it is. And I think part of it too is being willing to ask a lot of why questions and maybe not say anything to them, which, I mean, this is the hardest thing on the face of the earth. It is very hard for people to bite their tongues. I know that it's hard for me, it's hard for other people. I've seen other people.
Well, when you got the knowledge, it's hard to impart it, or hard not to impart it too.
Yes. And it's, especially if what the person is saying is absolute insanity. That is, you're just standing there like.
I think one of the things that comes to mind for me, you know, because what we're talking about now is a great illustration of what you were saying earlier about black and white versus nuanced and gray. Because, you know, in the conversation you were talking about, Adam, like the black and white approach is, hey, look, you shouldn't have said that. That was wrong. And here's why it's wrong. Let me tell you why it's wrong. And don't do it again or you'll get a spanking. You know, like it's very clear this is what it is. But the nuanced approach is, you know, giving the other person the benefit of the doubt. It's contextualizing your message for that person in that situation. And that takes work sometimes. You know, like, especially if you're steeped in your ideology and you have your pat answers for everything that's going to go out, that's going to come out of your mouth when it comes to any kind of political or social issue. Like, it's really hard to take a step back and say, okay, before I say this, and why I think that is so important, the contextualization of the message. You know, we can get into the higher stuff about, like, you know, loving the other person. But even if you were to take that off the table and not even thinking about, I'm really trying to benefit this other person, I'm looking out for them, but think about it just purely from a strategic, practical perspective. Because you may hate this person's guts, you know, or you may just not like anything about this person. But if you need to get a point across to this person, what's going to be the most strategic way to do that? Where you might actually impact something in a positive way. And I think, you know, like there have been so many times in the last few years, like on Facebook, where I just want to take my young friends to the side and say, it's usually younger friends. It's like, look, you are 100% right, but the way you're saying that, nobody's going to listen to you. Nobody that you want to influence is going to listen to you when you say it like that.
Well, this is where you catch more flies with honey.
Yeah.
But I mean, on top of that, because I was working with Eric on Towards One Wisconsin, we were really worried about that we would have those kind of attacks where people would do this. And we created a set of ground rules for people walking into conversations to try to help. It's not just our younger ones, because some of our older ones can go.
That's not a fair generalization.
But sometimes there's a lack of finesse in that younger generation that can be kind of redirected
That's right.
at a younger age.
Yeah.
To put those ground rules out there, and we had a lot of wrangling over the ground rules. What should the ground rules for a conversation about equity, equality, and inclusion look like? You know, so how do you keep people from playing the victim or being passive aggressive without silencing people? Because I mean, the two biggest things that happen is you get someone who gets defensive and they start playing the victim, and the minute the crocodile tears come up or the screaming comes up, all of a sudden they're papped on the back and things are derailed. Or you get the passive aggressive, all right, this is Northwestern Wisconsin. Passive aggressive comments under the breath, the muttering, the, oh, of course you are. You know, that kind of stuff. That you have to decide, okay, do I take that derailment and go with it? Or do I swallow and try to stay on agenda? You know, those are the two biggest ones that a lot of people talk about. Well, the third one is the person who everything you put on the table, they say, no, that's not going to work.
Yeah.
And we really tried to set those ground rules up so when people did that, we could say, that's ground rule here. And you made a promise not to get mad and start screaming.
Yeah.
Although I don't know how you get the Thanksgiving family to do that.
Just don't do Thanksgiving with your family.
Well, my thing is, I'm the kind who, if Uncle Jojo is present, I will organize all the cousins. And the minute Uncle Jojo starts trying to push a button, if everyone screams no, Uncle Jojo looks shocked.
Right.
You know, and Uncle Jojo, we have to understand these derailing people always have enablers. They don't get away with this about the enablers.
Right.
So when the enablers start up, don't talk to your uncle like that. No.
Yeah.
So.
Well, tell them to stop saying stupid ass stuff, and then I won't do that to them.
But see, the enablers get upset because the enablers want to keep the peace. And I mean, that's the same thing with the racial conversation. You know, you just called me what? Oh, stop arguing about that. We're trying to get through the meeting here.
Yeah.
You know, now if 6 people turn around and go, no, what are they supposed to do?
Yeah.
You know, or
I think maybe proactively. I mean, and maybe this would be really hard in some, especially if you have the more dysfunctional the family dynamic is, the harder it can be. But I mean, maybe even just trying to say, hey, everybody that's coming, like figure out a way to communicate before everybody sits down together. Hey, these things are off limits. We're just not going to talk about this stuff.
Well, I had a relative who clearly did not think my children were going to make it to adulthood. And we taught, whenever this person made a criticism, Ben and I both taught our children to say, when we pointed at them, but I'm still alive. Like Rudy.
Oh my God.
So you need to do this, and the kid goes, but I'm still alive. You know, and we sort of trade the relative. You know, we still get the occasional comments, and the kids don't even need us to point anymore. They automatically say, but we're still alive.
I'm glad we're talking about this stuff tonight, though, because I honestly, you talked earlier about that response from the Gottman stuff, the research that sometimes when you really go after somebody, the person goes into turtle mode and they withdraw. I find that I tend to be like that. You know, like I don't really want to get in a fight with anybody. I don't mind having meaningful conversation where we lean into conflict in a loving way. Like, I like that. Let's talk about stuff. And if it gets a little heated, that's okay. As long as we trust each other and we're going to work through it together, that's cool. And social media has played a big role in this for me. Like, I shut down. I've blocked people. I've blocked more people in the last like 5 years. And I'm not, I had blocked maybe 1 or 2 people before that. But I started blocking people because I'm like, first off, I don't really need that influence on my social media stuff. Secondly, I've got friends who would be really offended by some of the things you're saying, and I don't want them to be exposed to it, you know. So, and
a lot of the time when you comment on something, even if I'm not friends with them, if their post is public, I see that you're commenting.
That's right.
And it's like, here we go again.
I mean, sometimes
not
it can
here we
be,
go again because of you, but here we go again. Here's another friend that's just commenting on their tangential friend's stuff.
That's right.
And it's coming into my feed.
And on occasion, I have seen really beautiful things happen when there's been conflict in a thread. I remember one time where there was it had something to do with stereotypes about Islam or something. I can't remember. Somebody was making, and in the same thread there was another guy who made comments, and I blocked him, and he's blocked, and he's staying blocked because. And this was like 5 years ago. But one of the other people made a comment that was virtually kind of insensitive toward Muslims, could be offensive. And I have a Muslim friend who chimed in on the thread, and it ended up where the guy who made the original comment, like, he wasn't coming from a mean place. He was coming from it was a place of he didn't really understand these things. Ignorance. Or whatever, you know. Yeah. And his response to her intervention was really positive and just like, oh, that's really cool and whatever, you know. So there can be positive connections made, but a lot of times, man, when these things come up, I don't want to hear it. It's why I don't hardly post anything that's of real meaning anymore on social media.
Except you can find my shrimp and grits post.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, that's really what we should be talking about right now, is that Selika made shrimp and grits, and none of them are sitting in front of us right now.
Just coffee from Shift, which, I mean,
I'm not complaining.
It's coffee from Shift, but, you know, I mean, I'll tell you what, if you have surgery and let me know, I'll make you shrimp and grits. But yeah, I don't think you can have a really meaningful discussion with strangers on Facebook. I mean, you can have it with people you know. You can have it maybe in one of those Facebook groups where people have a shared understanding of what they're talking about.
Yeah.
Although I've seen some amazingly insane stuff in some of the teacher groups on Facebook. So I just don't even post it there.
Yeah.
But I think that these kind of conversations need to be in person. And people on Facebook and Twitter need to learn how to use the acquaintances group and the restricted group.
Yep.
Because certain people don't need to see what you're putting on Facebook. But I admit I have turtle tendencies and flare tendencies. So I'll put up with a whole lot, but if you push me in the corner too far, I've got that Irish Creole that comes out. So, you know, a lot of people will go, oh, she's calm, oh, she'll be this, and then they're shocked.
When you bring the thunder.
Yeah, because they just didn't expect it.
Yeah.
But that goes with something else that people do. It's that they believe that the only way to resolve it is to resolve it at that moment.
Yeah.
And some people need a little time to process. But they will start attacking, and the person wants to disengage.
Well, and often it ends with, well, we'll just agree to disagree. But then
they won't even let it go there.
No, and there are times where, yes, you can agree to disagree that you think the sky is red and I'm saying that it's blue, but you're still not right, even if you're agreeing to disagree with me.
Sometimes when I'm in that kind of conversation, I have to go, look, I need to piece out of this conversation for a little bit and process what you're saying. Not because that's really going to help, but that's going to keep me from screaming at this moment.
Yeah.
I have a colleague who's particularly bad about that and has to get the last word all the time. It's like, I've got a piece out of this conversation. Yep. And they'll still get that last word, and I have just had to learn, it's okay.
Peace out.
It's really okay. I'm out of here. But I've at least given them the opportunity to know, if you keep doing this, people will stump you.
That's right.
And I wish we taught people more of how to do that, how to create these scripts, or at least there's this website I love called Derailing for Dummies, and they have this whole list of derailing sentences that people use to mess up a conversation. But what people need to do is put one sentence responses to each derailment. Well, if it's that important, educate me. And it's like, no, I've only known you a minute. You don't give me homework. Go to Google or something.
Right.
Or
that's even dangerous now.
Well, yeah, or maybe I shouldn't say that.
Well, but that's a great point, actually, the whole Google thing. I'm glad you brought that up, because what I'm thinking about is you're talking about that discussion about the sky being blue versus the sky being red. Now, objectively, I can look at the sky and I know it's blue. What comes into play for a lot of people is for everybody, what is your source of truth? What is the thing by which you judge your reality and the reality around you? And obviously we all have our experiences, we have how we were raised, but I'm thinking about my experience in evangelical church. The Bible is one of those things where evangelicals in particular will say the Bible says this is the way it is, so I don't care what your science says, I don't care what your history says, this is what it is. And I'm not meaning to single out evangelical Christians. I mean, we all have our sources of truth that we lean on. And so now your example, somebody trying to convince me that the sky is red because some book told them that.
But you could Google red sky,
right?
And I'm sure that you could find pictures of the sunset and be like,
let me prove it for you.
It's red.
Right now, there it is.
And it's like...
But there's been research with people who have fallen victim to propaganda, and people, for instance, who've come out of QAnon and other things, that show that when the propaganda, et cetera, hits on something they have expertise in, that's what breaks the hold.
Interesting.
So if this person, for instance, is a farmer, and a propagandist told them that clay soil was the best soil for certain things, and they knew better.
Right.
That's enough to put the crowbar in.
Yeah.
So you can't just tell them they're wrong. You have to appeal to what they already have expertise in. So for an evangelical who says the Bible says so, well, the Bible's contradictory.
They would say it's not, though.
I would say, okay.
I'm just saying.
Oh, I know. I've got those relatives. Which version of the Bible? Which translation?
Yeah.
Do you know how to read Aramaic? Can you read Greek and Latin?
Yeah.
So which translation are we talking about?
Right.
I've got 5 Bibles in my house. Each one's a different version.
Right. We could dive into all that. I think the key, though, is if you are convinced that that's your source of truth. A lot of people would say the authorized King James version from 1611. That's the one that everybody, that a lot of people will say that's the actual version of the Bible. And
capital T,
it really
capital
doesn't,
B, the Bible.
And it doesn't matter, because I think the point is if you're say somebody all they do is watch CNN. And I'm going to use CNN because I don't want to pick on Fox News. But say somebody all they watch is CNN for their news. Everything comes through CNN. Their source of truth, in terms of how they understand what's happening right now, is going to be shaped by CNN. And so if you bring a divergent viewpoint or a divergent perspective from what they are getting on CNN, you're going to have a hard time persuading them that they're wrong, if that's their source of truth that they have bought into.
The generation in front of me, I'm a Gen Xer, is the generation through the military saw more of the world, and through the military was exposed to official BS. You know, and I was exposed to it through my military history programs when
Did you say
I was working.
official BS?
Yes, that's what
Okay.
it's called, which is what you put in the report versus what is on the ground. And you have to learn to read in between the lines. I mean, throughout the Cold War, we worst cased a lot of stuff so you could get more money. But if you've been in the military, you knew what they were doing, and you immediately lopped a couple of million off. I mean, as politicians have had less military experience, they've not learned to do that. But
I mean, recently even we're seeing that with the drone strikes
yes,
in the Middle East and reports being done by independent journalists and news media that are uncovering a lot of faults in our intelligence as far as who was going to be affected, and saying that there would be no civilian casualties or there would be no children affected. And we are finding now that the vast majority, I don't necessarily want to say vast majority, but majority of our unmanned drone strikes caused casualties among civilians in the Middle East.
there was a shared understanding in our populace that what was reported in the newspapers and what was reported in official reports had to be taken with a grain of salt. So you read between the lines. And that experiential ability to read between the lines has been lost. Because with something like, whether it's CNN, Army Times, NBC,
The Bible.
well, I wasn't going to say that one because I'm not getting in trouble with it. Library of Congress, an official report, you have to read between the lines.
Yep.
And, even newspapers, the whole yellow journalism thing, read between the lines. So there was this sort of combine everything and then figure out kind of what the truth was. But to have a framework where you understood things, they called it GI knowledge. There was the knowledge you had on the ground versus what would wind up in a report.
Yep.
And I'll be honest, if you work in government, if you work in business, anywhere, I mean, you go to any business, they're going to tell you there's a difference between what happens on the ground and what happens in the report.
Yeah.
But we have a set of people, we've always had a set of people who want to believe the literal word.
Yeah.
And they're annoying. I mean, in the military, they get people killed. These are the people, we're going to go by the book, boom, 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 boom. They fragged them in Vietnam. They frag them now, because there are times when you throw the book out the window, it'll keep people killed. Those are the people who, if I'm a teacher, I can't go by the book sometimes. Sometimes I'm going to have to bend it to get a student what they need. Or I'm going to have to file a waiver.
Or write a new page.
I had a former dean who hated waivers. Wanted to change everything up so that we'd never do waivers again. Thought waivers were bad. Screwed the mess completely. There is a reason for exceptions. And to get people back to that experiential knowledge of how to work together without shooting at them, that's the problem. Because this knowledge came from being shot at.
Yeah.
I don't want people shot at, but I want people to understand you can't repeat a talking point verbatim. There's truth in between the lines for both sides.
On that note, we probably need to call it a night, because my appetite is honestly just whetted a little bit now. Like, I really want to keep diving into this. This rich conversation, but our time, the time to close up shop here has come. So, man, it's been so good to sit with you two, and it's been a little bit of a stream of consciousness conversation, but there has been a consistent thread throughout. about, like having these conversations that are really important and how to do those in a nuanced fashion, recognizing there's a lot of nuance, that not everything is black and white. In fact, most things aren't black and white. So this has been really, really rich for me. Hope it has been for you too.
Oh, yeah.
And let's do this again soon.
Yes.
Sounds good.
All right, have a good night, you guys.
You too.